All right, so at this point in the lesson, hopefully you've watched the video about the artist Colette Fu. She's doing some really amazing artwork using paper engineering or pop-up techniques combined with photography to create really meaningful artwork. We are also going to be looking at using basic paper engineering or pop-up art techniques as well in our next lesson. Today we're going to get started learning a very basic technique called a V-fold. So before you move into working on this assignment, it's very important that you brush up on some measuring skills. So this is a protractor. If you don't have one at home, it's not the end of the world, but if you do, I highly suggest you pull it out for this lesson. So a protractor is used to measure angles, and I provided a link with an excellent video just as a refresher showing you how to use a protractor to measure angles. You're also going to want to have a ruler. I'm going to be measuring in inches, so you definitely want an inch ruler on hand. When you're using it, make sure you're using the side marked inches, not the side marked with centimeters. I've also provided a tutorial that's excellent to help you refresh your measuring skills, or maybe if you've not ever had anybody teach you, it's a starting point to show you how to begin to use your ruler accurately. Measuring is a really important skill that you'll need your whole life. So now's a great time to build on those skills if you haven't already. So you'll want a ruler and a protractor. If you don't have these things at home, again, it's not the end of the world. You can still do the lesson, but you're gonna have to do some estimating and guessing. The other materials that you want to have on hand, you're gonna need your visual journal. If you don't have your visual journal, not the end of the world, we can make substitutions, but I'm gonna be working with the visual journal. Potentially some scrap paper. I'm also going to be using the paper from the watercolor pad that you should have gotten from the school. If you don't have a watercolor pad, any type of paper will work for this, but I'm specifically going to be using paper from here. You'll want a pencil and some type of glue. Now, if you're using a glue stick, that's fine. You can also use a white glue, which will work okay too. If you're using white glue, I'll show you how to use a paintbrush with it. You will need to wash your paintbrush if you are using white glue with your brush, okay? All right, so we've talked about your materials, so let's go ahead and get ready to move on to step one. So I'm gonna move these materials aside and set up for the next step. Okay, so I've taken a piece of paper from the watercolor pad and I've torn it out of the watercolor pad. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my pencil and my ruler. I'm going to make sure that I am using the inches side of my ruler and not the side that says centimeters. Centimeters will be marked with the cm, so make sure you're not using that. Make sure you're looking for the side that is marked inches. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to measure 8 inches along the side of my paper. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to line this first line up with the 0. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit here for you. So I'm lining the 0 up directly with the edge of the paper, okay? Then what I'm going to do is I am going to mark 8 inches. That's the line directly above the 8. Okay, so I'm making a mark at 8 inches. The next thing I'm going to do is I am going to go along the edge, bottom edge of my paper, and I'm going to measure 5 inches. So I'm going to take the 0, I'm going to line that first line up with the edge of my paper, and I'm going to scoop my ruler down towards the bottom. I'm now going to measure 5 inches. So I'm going to go to the 5. The line is directly above it for 5 inches, and I'm going to make a mark. I am going to do that at the top of the paper as well. So I'm going to mark 5 inches again. So again, I've taken my ruler, lined the first line for the 0 up. I find my 5, I make a mark. I'm then going to use my ruler to connect those 2 marks I've just made on my paper. So I'm going to line the ruler up and connect the 2 marks. Make sure the ruler is connecting both points. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I am going to measure from the bottom of my paper. I'm going to line my ruler up with the bottom of the paper along the line I just drew, okay? So here's the bottom, putting the 0 right along the bottom edge and moving the ruler directly beside the line I just connected and drew, and I'm going to measure 8 inches. Okay? From here, I'm then going to turn my ruler the opposite direction, and I am going to connect those 2 points. So what I should have just created on my paper is a large rectangle that measures 5 inches across by 8 inches long. The reason we're doing this is because we're going to be working in our visual journal. Our paper, or a visual journal, is about, it's 5 by 8 inches. So we want a piece of paper that's the same dimensions. Okay, now that we have the first rectangle set up, we're going to set up one more using the exact same dimensions, so 5 inches by 8 inches. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to scoot our paper up, and we are going to place our ruler along the bottom edge. Now when you do this, your 0 is going to line up directly on top of that line we just drew. Okay, so here's my 0, and I'm going to measure 5 inches. I'm going to scoot my ruler to the top and do the same thing. So my 0 is lined up directly with this line. I'm measuring 5 inches, and then I'm going to connect those 2 marks with my ruler. Now remember, if I'm going too fast for you, all you have to do is pause the video, re-watch it as needed. Okay, so I've connected those 2 marks. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure 8 inches from the bottom. So I'm lining my ruler up along the bottom edge of my paper, and I am measuring 8 inches. Okay. I'm going to scoot over and do the same thing over here on this line. So my 0 is lining up the bottom edge of the paper. I'm going to line the ruler up with this line that I've already drawn, and I'm going to mark 8 inches. It should be at the same spot as we had over here. You're going to turn your ruler and you're going to connect those 2 marks again. Okay, so this is what your paper should look like at this point. So you should have 2 large rectangles. Both should be the same size as the pages in your visual journal. Now, one thing I forgot to tell you were going to need, and I don't know how I forgot to mention this, is you're going to need a pair of scissors. Okay, so go grab a pair of scissors, and you're going to come back, and once you've grabbed your scissors, we're going to be cutting on this first section. We're going to cut this first section out. So if you need to grab your scissors, pause the video here, and then come back. Okay, so we're going to take our scissors and we're going to cut very carefully and very neatly right along that vertical pencil line that we made. Okay, I'm gonna set this one aside. We're going to save that because we're going to need it later on in the project. I'm going to cut right along this edge to remove this skinny rectangle we have at the top. So I'm going to turn my paper, and I'm going to cut very neatly and very slowly along that edge. Okay, this part you can just set aside. We don't really need it. You can throw it away, you can keep it. Maybe we could use it. There is a pop-up technique we could use this for. So if you want to set it aside, you can. But for now, what you really need is this, okay? All right, so we have a little bit more measuring to do. We have to divide this paper into 2 equal sections. And here's why. For our first set of pop-ups that we have, let's see if I can get the light on this a little bit better. We are going to be working with half pages for our first pop-ups, okay? So let me get it from this angle, okay? So to do that, we need to cut our paper to the right size. So we're gonna go ahead and measure this. So this should be 5 by 8. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and I'm gonna turn my paper this way. This should measure 8 inches if I line up my ruler. So halfway would be 4 inches. So I'm going to find the 4 and I am going to mark it on my paper. I'm going to scoot my ruler down to the bottom, line my 0 up with the edge of my paper, and I'm going to measure 4 inches again. I'm then going to connect those 2 points of measurement with my ruler like that. So the reason we want to measure these and use 2 points to connect our lines is because if you just measure once and then you stick your ruler on there, we're not great at creating straight lines. Our eyes think that they know, but they're really not. And because we want to have these fit the pages we're working on, it's going to be very important that you actually are measuring correctly. Okay, so the next thing you're going to do is you're going to take your scissors again and you're going to cut along that line we just drew. Okay. All right, we're gonna set these aside for a second because we have some work to do in our visual journal. So we're gonna grab our visual journal and we're gonna set this up for our first page of pop-ups that we're going to do. So what we wanna do is we actually want this to be able to open like a card for our pop-up to work. So the way I did it, because I don't want to use too many of your pages up, is I decided we could do small practice ones. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn our visual journal so that the wires are facing our stomach, and we're going to line our ruler up on our visual journal, and you'll notice that it's 8 inches across. So what we're going to do is we're going to divide this in half. So just like we did before, we're going to mark at 4 inches at the top. We're going to turn the visual journal so that the wires are facing away from us. We're going to line our ruler up here and measure 4 inches here. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we are going to connect these 2 lines with our ruler like that. And we're going to just cut on that first page, so you can flip it so that just one page is out of the journal like this. And you're just gonna cut right along that pencil line. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we are going to fold these in half. So like, think of it as like we're making a pop-up card or a pop-up book. So we need to create that form. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the bottom edge of the visual journal and we are going to fold it up to, let's see if I can do this with like this so you can see it better. Basically up to the little notches that we see here that are cut out. So try and line that up. I like to press one corner down once I have it lined up. Line up the other corner or the other edge and press the other corner down. And this paper is really thick, so it's a little bit harder to fold. So there are a couple things you can do. You can take your handle on your scissors and just really press that firmly down. You could use your glue stick, anything that's going to help you get a nice firm fold, okay? So you should have a fold. And what that is creating is called a gutter or gully. So that's what that's referred to in pop-up engineering or pop-up art, okay? We're gonna do the same thing with this piece. So we're just gonna take this and repeat the process. Okay, so when we fold this back over, now, let me turn the light down a little bit so we don't have such a glare. There we go, that's better to see this. Now what we have are 2 pages that are folded that you should then be able to open up, okay? And that's because for this assignment, like I said, we're gonna be creating some basic pop-up figures, and you're gonna need to be able to have the page open and shut for the pop-up to work, okay? All right, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna set aside the visual journal. We're gonna take our first sheet of paper that we cut, and we are going to fold that in half. So again, what I like to do, this paper is a little bit easier to fold because it's not as thick. I'm gonna match the corners up or have the corners kiss, as some of you may have had teachers in the past tell you. And then what I do is I take my finger just below that and press that down. And then I match up my other corner, make the corners kiss or the edges kiss, and then press with my finger down here. And the reason I started the edges like that is to help me keep an even fold the whole way through, and then I can press this down. And that nice sharp fold that we get from going over this with our scissors actually makes this more effective, okay? So we've got this set up, and we're going to be ready to start our first basic pop-up technique, which is a V-fold. So you'll see that this sheet of paper, if you've done everything correctly, should fit nicely right inside of that visual journal paper, okay? That's the goal. All right, so next what we're going to do is we are going to turn our paper so that the fold is facing your left hand. Your left hand makes the L, and you're gonna lay it shut, okay? Now, remember that this measures 4 inches, okay? So what we're going to do now is we are going to mark at 2 inches. I'm going to zoom in a little bit for this. So on my ruler, I'm going to identify where the 2-inch mark is. So again, I'm lining the line for the 0 up at the bottom of my paper, and I'm just going to make a little pencil mark here. Okay, so that's at 2 inches. Now what I'm going to do is from here, I'm going to line my ruler up with that 2-inch mark, and I'm going to measure 1 inch. So here's the 1 inch, so I'm just going to go all the way back to the edge of the paper. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my protractor. If you don't have a protractor, you can kind of estimate the angles, but if you do have one, I want you to try using it. So what I'm going to do is I am going to take my protractor and I am going to line these points up, and I'm going to see about putting another color underneath here to see if we can see it a little bit better on the screen. There we go, that'll help. So I've lined my protractor up here, and I'm taking this, the end of my line, and I'm lining it up with this line here on my protractor and the center line here. And what I'm gonna do from there is I'm gonna measure a 45-degree angle. So here's 40, these are measured in 10, so 10, 20, 30, that means that we know halfway would be worth 5. So we're gonna measure a 45-degree angle. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna take my ruler and I'm gonna find the 45-degree mark, and I am going to line the ruler up with the 45-degree mark and the intersection of those lines. Then what I'm going to do with my pencil is I'm going to just mark that angle on my paper, okay? So here I have the angle marked. So when I connect this back to this line, I should be creating a 45-degree angle. Okay. Our next step is to take our scissors, cut on that line just to the end. I'm not going to cut any further than that. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my ruler again, and I'm just going to use the ruler to help me fold. So some of you remember when we were working on our sculptures, I used a ruler to help me make some folds. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to line my ruler up with the pencil line, and I'm just going to use that to guide my fold. Okay, so that's guiding my fold. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to very firmly press this fold down, make a really crisp fold, okay? Now, what I'm gonna do, and watch carefully, I'm gonna go slowly, is I am going to flip this over, and I'm gonna pull the triangle back, and I'm gonna fold it the other direction. Okay, so essentially you've taken this triangle and you've folded it forward and backward, okay? Pretty simple. Now what we're going to do is we're gonna open this up. We have something that looks like this. You're gonna take your finger, and from behind, while it's open, you're going to push that out. Okay, so I just took my finger and I'm pushing that triangle out like this. Okay, so when I close it now, it'll look like this. So that when I open and close this, I'm getting kind of like a beak shape at the top there, or a triangular shape. Okay, now our last step in this particular cut is to put it into our journal. So this is a single V fold which we've just created, and we'll label that at some point so that we remember what it is. So this is a single V fold. So let's talk a second about gluing it in. So I've got my visual journal and I've got this page set up like my pop-up, okay? So that when you're done, you're going to have something that looks like this. So that when you open up your journal and you open that page, you see that popping up. Okay, when we're gluing a pop-up, we want to make sure that the area of the pop-up, so this area of the triangle, never gets any glue on it, right? We don't want to get that part glued down. That would defeat the purpose of a pop-up. It would no longer pop. So we have to make sure that we're only applying glue to the areas around it. So working on top of a scrap paper is a great idea if you have one. And what you can do is just make sure to go around the edges but you're never going close to the actual cut of the pop-up. Now, I'll show you what I did with the liquid glue in the brush, because this is how I did put it into mine. So you're gonna start with just a little bit, because a little bit of liquid glue can go a very long way. You're gonna grab your paintbrush, and you're just gonna brush it across the page. Spread it out so it's nice and thin, so you don't have any bubbles of glue or puddles. Make sure you go along the edge. And again, you're just spreading that out. You do have to remember that if you do use this technique, that you need to wash your brush, not let it dry out. So Elmer's glue is washable. So you can just use a little bit of soap and dish soap and water to clean it out when you're done. Okay, so I've got glue all over the back of that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab this first journal page, and I'm gonna go ahead and put this in. So I'm gonna line up the gutter or the gully, which is that center crease, with the other one. I'm gonna sandwich those in place. And when I fold it over, I'm gonna press it firmly. And then I'm gonna open it up, okay? All right, that's our first fold. So this is a single V-fold, so we can go ahead and label this. So I'm gonna write single V-fold. And this was doing, we did a 1-inch cut. So I can write 1-inch cut. Remember, IN is the abbreviation for inch. 1-inch cut. 45-degree angle. And then just so you remember, this is the gutter or the gully. If you want to write that down, you can as well, okay? All right, so that's our single V-fold. So the next one we'll be moving into is the double V-fold. So we'll come back for the next video and we'll do our double V-fold.